All right, let's jump into this deep dive. We got a ton of requests to dig into this guide about building a chicken empire.
A chicken empire.
And I gotta say, when I first saw the title, I was a little skeptical.
Yeah, me too, a little bit.
Like, how much money can you really make from chickens? But then I started reading, and it's actually pretty fascinating. What were your initial thoughts when you first saw this guide?
Well, I was definitely intrigued. The idea of starting with just 20 hens and ending up with a flock of 300 within a year.
300?
Yeah, 300. That's what the guide claims is possible. It really got me thinking about the potential scale of this.
So how do they even get to those numbers?
Well, it all comes down to the breeding cycle. The guide lays out a pretty specific strategy. It's based on maximizing the number of breeding cycles the hens can go through in a year.
Okay, so more breeding cycles means more chicks, which means more chickens.
Exactly. So basically, the hens lay their eggs, hatch them, and then they raise the chicks for about a month. And then here's the key. The chicks are separated from the mother hens.
So they're not spending months raising each batch of chicks.
Right. And that's what allows the hens to start laying again much sooner. And because they're laying sooner, they can go through more breeding cycles per year.
Okay, so they're kind of like super efficient egg-laying machines.
In a way, yeah. But it's not just about pushing the hens to their limit. The guide also emphasizes the importance of keeping them healthy and well cared for. They even mention the potential earnings you could get from just 7 eggs, enough to buy Yaka tokens for your phone.
That's a really smart way to illustrate the potential income. It's like, hey, you could be earning enough from your chickens to cover everyday expenses.
Yeah, it makes the whole idea feel much more tangible.
Okay, so we've got this potential for massive growth, but what about the logistics of actually managing a flock of 300 birds? I mean, that's a lot of chickens to take care of.
Oh, absolutely. That's where the guide starts to get really interesting. They call it the floor stock, having 300 hens and then 50 roosters.
50 roosters? Why so many?
That's a good question, and the guide does explain the reasoning behind those specific numbers. But the main point is that it's not just about cramming as many chickens as possible into a small space.
So there's a strategy behind those numbers.
Exactly, and that's a crucial takeaway. The guide might focus on the potential profits, but it also emphasizes the importance of responsible and sustainable practices.
So it's not just about making money, it's about doing things the right way.
Right. And that's what I think makes this deep dive so interesting. We're going beyond the surface level and exploring the real challenges and opportunities of building a backyard chicken empire.
I'm ready to dig deeper. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of what it takes to make this work.
All right, so let's imagine someone's listening to this and thinking, okay, I'm ready to dive into this chicken empire.
Yeah.
Where do they even begin? What's the first thing they need to consider?
Well, I'd say the first thing that pops into my mind is space. I mean, you can't just expect 300 chickens to be happy living in a tiny little coop in your backyard.
Exactly. And the guide really emphasizes the importance of providing adequate space for the chickens. Happy chickens, healthy chickens, they lay more eggs.
So it's not just about cramming them in, it's about creating a good environment for them to thrive.
Exactly. They talk about a well-designed coop, enough room to move around, enough space for them to sleep, and also lay their eggs comfortably.
It's not just any old coop though, right?
Right. You're going to need to think about the design. The guide mentions things like roosting bars and nesting boxes. You want to make sure there are enough for all the hens. Avoid overcrowding.
Overcrowding is probably a recipe for disaster. I can imagine the chickens getting stressed out, maybe even fighting with each other.
Absolutely. And stress is definitely not good for egg production. And then on top of the coop, you've got to think about the outdoor space as well.
Oh yeah, the chickens can't just be cooped up all day, right?
Nope. They need their outdoor time. The guide talks about a secure outdoor run, a place where they can stretch their legs, peck around, get some fresh air, do their natural chicken things.
And I imagine that keeping those 300 chickens safe from predators is a top priority. We're talking snakes, mongooses, stray dogs, cats.
Exactly. Predators are a real concern, especially in Uganda. So the guide really stresses the importance of a good fence. A fence that's tall enough, sturdy enough to keep those predators out.
But also secure at the bottom, right? Because chickens like to dig.
Yeah, they're little escape artists, so you got to make sure that fence goes all the way down.
So we're talking about a pretty serious construction project here, building a spacious coop, a secure outdoor run for 300 birds. It sounds like a pretty big investment up front.
It definitely requires some resources, that's for sure. But the guide frames it as an investment that's going to pay off in the long run.
That's a good point. You're not just building a coop, you're building a business.
Right. It's a different mindset. But even with the best coop and run, there's still the day-to-day work of taking care of all those birds, feeding them, watering them, cleaning up after them.
300 chickens, that's a lot of chicken poop.
It is. The guide actually has some suggestions for managing that, though. They talk about using bedding materials like wood shavings.
To absorb the dropping.
Yeah, and to make it easier to clean. Plus, it can also be used for composting later on.
So nothing goes to waste. It's a closed-loop system.
Right. It's about sustainability and making the most of your resources. But, with all this talk about efficiency and maximizing output, we can't forget that we're dealing with living creatures here.
That's a really good point. Does the guide address any ethical considerations of raising chickens on this scale?
Yeah, they do touch on it briefly. They emphasize the importance of providing enough space for the chickens to move around and engage in their natural behaviors. They also talk about keeping the coop clean and dry to prevent diseases.
So it's not just about profit, it's about the well-being of the chickens as well.
Right. But I think it's fair to say that the guide's primary focus is on the business side of things.
Yeah, they're giving you the tools to build a successful operation, but it's up to each individual to decide how they want to approach the ethical side of it.
Exactly. So let's talk about that financial side of things. The guide claims you can earn a pretty substantial income from selling eggs and birds. But realistically, how does that actually work?
Yeah, I remember they mentioned a figure, something like 14 million shillings a year.
Right. And that's based on selling both eggs and mature birds.
Sure.
But what the guide doesn't really get into is the nitty-gritty of actually marketing those products.
You mean like finding buyers, setting prices, dealing with competition?
Exactly. You can't just assume that people are going to be lining up to buy your eggs and chickens.
So you need to have a business plan.
Definitely. You need to do your market research, figure out your pricing strategy, and understand your costs.
Yeah.
Because, on top of the initial investment in the coop and the run, there's also the ongoing expenses of feed, water, bedding, and any medical care the chickens might need.
So it's not just about the income, it's about managing all those expenses as well.
It's like running any other business. You've got to be smart about it.
So this chicken empire, it's not just about passion and love for chickens, it's about having a good head for business.
Absolutely. And you need to be willing to put in the work.
Well, we've talked about space, logistics, ethics, even a bit of business strategy. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to come back to that initial investment. Realistically, how much money are we talking about to get this chicken empire off the ground?
That's where things can get a little daunting for some people. Building a coop that's big enough and secure enough for 300 birds, creating that outdoor run, buying all the equipment you're going to need, it can add up quickly.
Yeah, we're talking about sturdy fencing, feeders, waters, bedding materials, and depending on the climate, you might even need to think about things like lighting or heating for the coop.
That's why the guide really stresses the importance of a detailed business plan. You need to crunch the numbers, figure out all your costs, and project your potential earnings.
So it's not a decision to be made lightly. It's an investment that requires careful planning and consideration.
Exactly. It's not just about passion. It's about being smart and realistic about the financial side of things.
This has been a great conversation so far. We've gone beyond the surface level of this guide and really started to explore what it takes to build a backyard chicken empire. It's been really interesting breaking down this chicken empire guide. We've covered so much ground, from breeding cycles to coop designs to the business side of things. What are some of the key things that have stood out to you during this deep dive?
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that this guide is really just a starting point. It's like a blueprint. But the real success comes from the individual farmer's knowledge, their skills, and their dedication.
It's not just about following a set of instructions, it's about understanding the principles behind them.
Right. And it's about being adaptable and willing to learn and adjust along the way. Because, no two chicken farms are going to be exactly the same.
Yeah, there are so many variables to consider: the climate, the breed of chickens, the local market conditions. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Definitely not. And I think someone listening to this might be thinking, okay, this sounds like a lot of work. Is it really worth it?
That's a valid question. I mean, we've talked about the potential rewards, but also the challenges and the upfront investment. So what would you say to someone who's on the fence about this?
I'd say it really depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to get rich quick, this probably isn't it. But if you're drawn to the idea of building something sustainable, of being connected to your food source, and the satisfaction of raising healthy animals, then the effort might just be worth it.
It's about more than just the potential profits. It's about a whole lifestyle.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so compelling, I think. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's an opportunity for each individual to define what success looks like for them.
And I think that's a really empowering message. It's like you don't have to follow someone else's definition of success. You can create your own.
Yeah, and this guide, it's like a spark. It can ignite your own exploration, and then it's up to you to decide what kind of chicken empire you want to build, what values you want to prioritize.
What a great way to put it. It's about taking that initial inspiration and then making it your own. So for anyone listening who's feeling inspired to take on this challenge, what would be your final piece of advice?
I'd say do your research. Don't just rely on this one guide. Talk to other chicken farmers, visit local farms, and really immerse yourself in the practical realities of raising these birds.
Get your hands dirty, literally.
Exactly. And most importantly, remember that this is a journey, not a destination. Be prepared to learn and adapt and grow along the way.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll be back here doing a deep dive into your story of building a successful and fulfilling chicken empire. Until then, happy farming, everyone.